in a conversation, what you think about, how you would define it, everything and anything that you can think of about this topic. Go. Not okay to assault someone. Not only morally incorrect, but the law also is against it, right? So there are two good reasons not to okay to assault somebody.
Yeah.
Okay? All right. What else do we know?
You get fines, like it's like NFL, like you get fined if you do something wrong and then you get considered assault and it's like 10%.
Okay, so it can be considered assault if you get kind of a physical with somebody. And when it comes to the law, when we initiated our conversations a few weeks ago, we kind of the first topic that we had was about the legal system, and then we kind of talked about criminal versus civil law, right? When it comes to assault and battery, what do we think? What type of law are they?
Both
Huh?
civil and criminal, right?
It can be both. So it's it's considered both. It can be criminal, civil in that you can be sued by the person that you assaulted or the person that assaulted you. You can sue him, and that's kind of how we always talk about criminal. It's individual versus individual, right? But when it comes to assault or battery, you can actually be charges can be brought against you by the state, right? So the state actually can charge you in the criminal court, and then it becomes state versus you, state versus individual, which we said that is kind of one of the setups for criminal case, right? When we were talking about negligence, we said that one of the things about negligence is that it is an intentional tort, not intentional, right? When it comes to battery and assault, it's actually a tort that is intentional, right? So there are certain differences with those two. That's kind of how we look at it. So it's civil law. We already kind of got to this one. It can also be criminal, and they are not really mutually exclusive, right? So meaning that it's not always both. So sometimes it just kind of can be settled in the civil court, and that'll be it. Sometimes you have both of them, right? Is intentional, so it's intentional tort. Difference between assault and battery and negligence is that second line there. That negligence are unintentional. It's considered to be individual versus individual, not versus the state. But again, in some cases, the state can be involved, and that becomes criminal, right? One thing about assault and battery is that the difference between the two are not often distinguished. So it's not very easy to kind of make that distinction between the two. The difference between the two are not often distinguished. The difference between the two are not often distinguished. And we're about to go through the elements of each one of them, and then you're going to see why it's so difficult to tell between one and the other one. Right? Not difficult, tricky. All right. So first we have civil assault. The elements of it are intention to cause harm. So it's a physical manifestation. That you're going to throw the punch, that you are going to swing the bat or the golf club, or that you are pointing the gun. It's intention to cause physical harm. Apprehension of immediate harm. That is from the perspective of the person being assaulted, that you actually felt in physical or imminent danger, that you actually fear for your physical integrity. Lack of consent is the third element. Lack of consent has to do with the rules or normative behavior of the game. We talk about the game because we are discussing this class in the setting of sports and sport management, right? In society at large, this would read something like rules and or normative behavior of society, right? So again, remember that the law is the law, and we don't have specific laws for just sports or sport management, right? So can you give me an example based on these three elements for assault? Can you give me an example of assault?
Hockey, when they fight in hockey.
When they what?
When they fight in hockey.
When they're fighting hockey.
I know it's considered part of the game, but it's still considered assault.
Yeah.
So,
Well, it's not assault because it doesn't lack consent. Both men consent to fighting, so therefore it's not assault. It's almost like, what do they call it in the streets? The two guys, a cop can go fight anyone in the street if he wants to, as long as the person he's fighting, the citizen he's fighting, consents to fighting. So it's not assault, like I said, because both guys, before they fight in a hockey game, they drop their gloves and they consent to fighting. So technically,
Oh,
I don't
yeah.
think it
I
could
see
be
the point,
assault
yeah.
there, yeah. So like, let's do this. Let's fight.
Yeah.
That's the point of the game, yeah.
So that would be one element on that one. And the other one is that first one, is the intention to cause harm, right? When you're actually fighting and you're actually making contact, that's probably battery and all of that. In assault, you just have to have the intention, you just have to make the motion, right? You don't have to actually make contact with the person. So the example that I had is that if a pitcher throws the ball with the intention to hit the batter, like throw it toward his face, but actually doesn't make contact, right? It's still considered assault, right? So it's more about the intention part, right? He intended to cause that harm, right? The result is kind of irrelevant when it comes to assault. You intended to cause the harm. The person felt intimidated by your action. If you come to me and kind of oh, what did you say to me? And and I'm intimidated. You're assaulting me, right? And I didn't consent to that, right? And that's what I was saying at the beginning, that it can be difficult to tell the difference between the two, right? This one is more of that feeling and sense that of danger, right? Then on the other hand, for battery, you have also the intent to cause harm or battery of harm, intent to cause harm or offensive touching. I want to go back to assault and say that usually people do get, the contact is made and it's also assault, right? So, but you don't have a case only with the intention of it, right? The contact is not consensual. The contact is not consensual touching, and for this second one, we have to add that the victim, regardless of whether the victim is conscious or not, cognizant of the touching, right? And then the third one is the lack of consent. So here we have the difference is element number 2, right? On the first one, on civil assault, we had the element number 2 is that intimidation, is that fear to being hit or being beat up, that type of thing, right? Is that intentional thing. The second one, we have it that the person intended to cause the harm or inappropriately touch the person. And the second element is that it actually makes that contact, right? Touch him or hit him or whatever it is, right? and then both of them have as the third element that lack of consent. So you can see that the difference between the two. That's why at the beginning of the conversation we established that it's not always that easy to make that distinction between the two, right? Obviously, battery is considered more serious, so that's why a lot of the times you're trying to bring it down to assault or simple assault or that type of thing, right? Kind of make the penalty a little bit lesser. Everybody seen how that kind of works? So some remedies for assault or battery, since they are intentional tort, the plaintiff could seek compensatory damages, and we already know what they are, right? Making you whole again, like if somebody gets beat up or hit or something like that, sent to the hospital, just make sure that my medical bills are paid and anything else that I might have lost in terms of wages, etc., right? And then punitive damages, we already explained those during our earlier conversations of negligence, and those have to do with the fact that the defendant is awarded a punishment, right? So meaning that the plaintiff is giving more than he or she was seeking, right? To send a message to the defendant that what they did is wrong, don't do it again, that type of idea, right? All right. So questions or comments about the elements of both assault and battery. Now we know there's civil cases, can be both also criminal. What else do we discuss? There are intentional torts. What about the elements, the remedies? What about the defenses? What do you think are defenses for an accusation of assault and battery?
Self-defense.
Self-defense is one. All right. So we have the notion of self-defense, defense of others, defense of property, and consent. Since one of the elements for both of them is consent, remember that the third element for both assault and battery is consent, right? So one defense will be, I had consent to do that, right? Maybe difficult to prove when you're trying to defend yourself while you kind of disfigure the other guy's face, right? Oh well, he consented to it. Probably not, right? All right, so let's discuss the first one, self-defense. What do we think that means? What does it look like?
Defending of oneself.
Defending oneself, right? That's actually it, right? It's actually quite self-explanatory. I don't even know why I asked. Most common defense, obviously, even when we're little kids, even when we are in our, even now, oh well, I just, he started it or she started it, right? That's self-defense, right? When we say he or she started it, that's what we are pretty much going for. Self-defense. I was just defending myself. I was just, standing up for myself. But in order for that self-defense defense to stick, the defendant would have to show that a threat or of unlawful a threat of unlawful force or harm against them. Right? So they were threatened, they were being faced with this unlawful force, the only choice was to stand up for themselves. They had a real, honest, perceived fear of harm to themselves. They have a real, honest, perceived fear of harm to themselves. And then again, this fear have to have some real basics or some real source. It cannot be something made up, right? You cannot just say, well, he was just looking at me funny, it has to be actually, you have to have real basis for that allegation that you actually were in fear for your physical integrity, right? Be, well, he was just wearing that type of shirt, or he was just, that's no real, like you cannot actually argue that's a good reason for you to have been fearful for your safety, right? It has to be actually you were confronted or something was said, something like more substantial, right? It cannot be just based on, you know, they were dressed or any of that type of deal, right? There must be a reasonable basis for this perceived here, reasonable basis, right? It cannot be just something that you made up, right? No harm or provocation on their part. So they must show that there was no harm or provocation on their part. They must show that there was no harm or provocation on their part. Again, so they didn't instigate it, they didn't kind of start it or add it to it, right? That's kind of like the third element that they need to show to be able to defend, to use the self-defense defense. And then the last one is that they must show that there was no reasonable chance of retreating. There was no reasonable chance of retreating or escaping the situation. There was no reasonable chance of retreating or escaping the situation. So, again, self-explanatory, right? That the incident was happening, it didn't happen, that there was no really reasonable way for you to just kind of walk away from it, right? So those are kind of like the four things that a defendant must show in order for the self-defense defense. Self-defense defense. All right, with that in mind, just this one I want you to talk it over like with another person or, you don't have to write it, just talk it over for about a minute and then come up with which of these two scenarios is more likely to succeed with the self-defense defense. Jay, is it?
Yeah,
Or-
sure. I would say A is a better case for self-defense. The only thing I'm a little worried about is Adam is terrified and strikes Bill first, so I don't know if that would technically be self-defense, but the guy lunging at him with fist raised would be definitely
All right.
provocation.
All right. Mariah?
No.
Well, you made the face.
We said B because Bill assaulted him first, hit Adam first. With A, Adam was terrified and he hit him first, but he also took off with it.
Okay.
So there's
Anybody wants to? So we have 1A, 1B. That's interesting.
Okay.
Dilemma. Anybody want to kind of explain one of them too and kind of say, hey, here's what I think is A or here's what I think B. And remember, this is a learning environment, so it's okay to challenge each other's.
We thought it was more A because B, they're kind of provoking each other as well. So in self-defense, I guess yeah, he hit him first, but they're going at each other. So you're provoking each other. That's what we thought.
All right. Anybody else wants to add to that? Did you see it?
No, I get it.
Okay, so I'm just gonna say that is A, and the reasons is what these guys explained is remember that we just got done kind of going through the list of things that the defendant will have to show in order to prove self-defense, and one of them is Lynn. Lynn was explaining to us. One of them was that the defendant has to show that he or she didn't add to the escalation of the situation, pretty much. That he or she wasn't an instigator, or that he or she wasn't really, contributing to the whole thing. And on the B scenario, Adam was actually, taking active part in this escalation, in this provocation, and all that, right? So that's one of the reasons why on B it wouldn't be as successful as in A. So I think that you mentioned that he struck first, but remember, if all the other elements were there, he felt that he wasn't even in danger, no way out, it doesn't really call for you to wait to be struck first, you know? As long as everything else remains, you find that the way for you to self-defend yourself, that's kind of a redundant, defend yourself, then you kind of punch first, I suppose, right? If everything else is present. So you remember that one? So the third one was no harm or provocation on their part. No harm or provocation on their part. And I think that the key there is that no provocation, right? I mean, eventually they might have to harm the person to defend themselves. Anyway, does that make any sense? All right. You might just see it again, so I want you to make sure that you understand the little intricacies of how it works. I just want you to make sure that you understand. All right, so the second one that we saw was defense of others. This one is pretty much similar to self-defense, but again, you're just defending somebody else, right? So honest and real pursued fear of harm to another person. And same thing as with the self-defense, the defendant must have had reasonable grounds for their perceived fear. The defendant must have had reasonable grounds for their perceived fear. So again, you were fearful that somebody else was about to get in trouble, but those fears must be based on reasonable grounds, right? Oh no, well, it seems like the other guy was really looking at her, angrily. I don't know. It has to be like something real, like you actually saw some intention going on or something like that, of harming somebody. Right? Does that make any sense? All right. And usually, when people defend somebody else, the action is taking place most of the time, right? Like the person is already being assaulted or something like that. Right? The third one is defense of property. So everybody has the right to defend his or her property against being invaded or illegally withheld. Right? So your things, your belongings are yours, and you have that right to defend it. But there are two caveats to it, how you go about it. Right? The first one is that if there is some sort of dispute over personal property, the owner is not entitled to use force to retrieve it, right? I've seen a lot of people with the same configuration of computer, when they have the same keypad and everything, and the same, right? Let's say that we go to a conference, to a meeting, and there's a lot of going on, and we all put our computers on the desk to charge it, or the charging station, and then then there's a confusion as to whose computer belongs to whom, right? I can go and actively advocate for my case for why this is my computer and not yours, and engage in discussion and anything else, trying to figure out why I need my property back. But I'm not entitled to actually use force, right? Kick you or punch you or anything like that, so that you will hand the computer over to me, right? Because there is confusion as to who it belongs to. Then the second caveat to it is that if the property has been stolen directly from an individual, say like you were pickpocketed, then you have the right to use reasonable force to recover your property. So if you see, like the guy is just kind of pickpocketing your wallet, and you kind of cashing in the ad, and then you kind of can react and punching, or whatever it is that you need to do to prevent your property from being taken away from you that way. Does that make any sense? So there are two different ways in which you can defend your property, and what parameters there are for each. Do those make sense? All right. So if it is confusion on whether it belongs to you or no, you kind of have to be a little bit more calm into how you go about recovering your property, defending your property. If it is just somebody actually right out trying to steal it, take it away from you by force, or then you have more liberty and the right to actually use reasonable force to prevent that from happening. And then, that's how you kind of present it to the court. Well, he was trying to steal it from me, yeah. You bet that I, hit it across the head with that bat, that type of idea. The same wouldn't, the same defense wouldn't work if, the person was just confused and didn't know that that computer wasn't here. That would be different. Then consent, we already established, is one of the elements present in both batteries and assault. So the defense would be something like if an individual has consented voluntarily to the particular act, then they wouldn't have a case then. To the extent of the act exceeds permission provided, it can still provide grounds for assault and battery charges. So this one is telling us that somebody can consent to certain things, but then if that's taken farther than what the person consented, then again, still charges for assault and battery can be pressed. Another thing about that is that consent can always be withdrawn, right? At any time during the act, right? So you can just say, I don't want to play this sport anymore, I'm done. Or I don't want to do this any longer, I'm done. And that's immediately means that the consent was withdrawn, so you couldn't use consent under those circumstances. If the person, after agreeing to do something, they withdraw this consent in the middle of the act, you couldn't use that defense anymore. This is obviously often seen this in sexual battery cases, right? And that's one of the examples when it can be both criminal and civil, right? Questions or comments about consent, about assault and battery? So some of the key points to keep in mind is those elements, how they're kind of a little bit different between the two. And one of the reasons why I kind of want to reiterate is because you might see both of them again, and you might have to make the difference between the two. So I just want to make sure that everybody knows those three elements of each, that consent and non-consent part, intention to harm, that part, the defenses of it. That's kind of some of the key things that I want you to kind of remember. Hint to the hint. All right, so any questions or comments about assault and battery? That was one of those short and sweet conversations. That's all we have for considering. Let's kind of